Okay, so that cute little video is about Garen Harding's Tragedy of the Commons. I'm going to do a little bit more explanation here. So the commons is this idea, thanks. The commons is this idea of like a field that everybody in the village can use to feed their livestock. So we're going to do some math here to look at how the way that we derive value from using the planet, from using animals, from using the land, puts us into this sort of paradox that Harding describes, where it ultimately is like a better idea for us to use up all of our resources and destroy ourselves. So let's imagine that each of us, let's say there are 5 of us, just for the sake of math. So 5 people in the class, one of you can sit out. Everybody has 20 cows, so we have 100 cows total. Every cow requires, let's say, just like 1 square unit of the commons in order to eat. And we'll get into some fuzzy math about like how many days it can go without food before it starves to death or something, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then for the sake of ease, we'll say that every cow generates us each $1. You can extrapolate from that like we're getting food and we're maybe selling cheese and milk or something to feed our families. So if this is the case and we have a commons that is 100 square units, we can do this. All right, 500. Close enough. Okay, so we're going to say that this is 100 square units. Then there's 1 unit per cow. Everything is great. Every cow eats exactly what it needs. Every cow produces 1 unit, so everybody gets $5 at the end of the day. That's perfect. Now, if let's see, I'm just going to pick people in the class. So Meta and Isa and Nicole, I'm going to spell your name wrong, I'm sorry. And Nancy and Janie, I don't know how you spell that either. You all have 20 cows per person. Oops, that's 30. Every cow gets exactly what it needs. Every person gets $20. And Meta gets the bright idea that, like, you know, if she had 21 cows, then she would make $21 per day, and that would be great. And every cow would get, we can run this math really quickly with a calculator. Every cow would get 100 divided by 101, 99% of what it needs, and that's probably fine, right? So Meta gets 5% more dollars, right? $1 is 5% of 20. So Meta gets 5% more dollars for a cost of just 0.01 of the commons. That seems like a pretty good deal. Isa sees that Meta's got an extra cow and she's like, well, I want in on that. So now we have 102 cows. I'm sorry, when I said everybody gets $5 here, it should be $20. Now, Isa sees that Meta has an extra cow. She's like, well, I want an extra cow too. And really, if we do the math again, 100 divided by 102 is 98%. So we're still totally fine here. You see where this might be going though, right? Everybody else is like, well, if everyone's got an extra cow, I want an extra cow. And now we're at 105, which is still 100 divided by 105, 95%. Everyone's fine. And then Meta's like, well, you know what? Like, I'm just going to bump this up to 40. So now we're at every cow's eating 83% of what it could normally eat, which is like probably fine, right? Your cows are a little skinny. Here's the most important thing. Meta's now making 200% profit, right? She's now making $40 every day instead of 20. And every cow is eating 83%, but that cost is spread out among all 120 cows, or 24 at this point. More importantly, that cost is all spread out among the 5 of you. So Meta is essentially like making you pay for her cows in terms of the resources that her cows use. Well, we see where this goes, and eventually everybody else has 40 cows. And now we have too many cows, right? We have 2 times the number of cows that we could sustainably have. So let's say some people's cows are going to start dying. Well, what are you going to do in this case? If everybody's going to lose 5 cows, then it actually behooves you, unintended, to just like go crazy, right? Go up to 70 cows. If we're going to lose an eighth of our, oh, let's say 80 for the sake of ease, we're going to lose an eighth of our cows, then you may as well just jump up to 80. Well, if Maida's jumping up to 80, and you see where this goes, right? This now spirals into like, we just want as many cows as possibly can for ourselves because we are in an arms race with an increasingly finite amount of resources. So, what does this have to do with environmental ethics? If you think back to our very, very first week of class, what are we talking about here in terms of altruism versus egoism? We're thinking about jointly benefiting interests. The video is like very optimistic at the end about how together humans can make these great changes. What we're talking about there is like humans have to realize our jointly benefiting interests, right? It is good for Maida to have 80 cows, but it's not jointly benefiting everybody. And ultimately, Harding's argument is that by being an egoist here, Maida's actually destroying herself. But it's also, and this is the paradox of it, it's also perfectly logical. There's no logical reason why Maida wouldn't try to go up to 21 cows when everyone else had 20, right? And everything that followed after that is also perfectly logical. If everyone else is moving up, then you also should move up. And this fits even within Rawls's paradigm of justice. So this is why we want to push a little bit on the video's conclusion is like, oh, we have social contract, right? And think back to our social contract day with Rawls. And Rawls insists that we want like rules that everybody would follow. We want rules where the person who benefits the least would still sign up for this. But the problem is that Harding identifies is that like nobody's going to want to be the least, right? Everyone's going to want to say like there's really no rational social contracty reason why Janie would stay at 20 cows except out of altruism. Right, except out of like a recognition that if she starts elevating, maybe everyone else will start elevating. But the problem is that if Janie's like, no, I'm going to take a stand, I'm staying here, and everyone else keeps going up, Janie continues to pay the cost, right? Like her cows are still eating less as well. So this is what takes us to Andreaus' puzzle of the self-torture. This is a little bit of a gross thought experiment. I apologize, but it's pretty useful. I didn't end up using that square at all, did I? I was going to draw cows, but it's more fun on the board. Stop. Okay. So I'm going to make you an offer. Can I do an arrow? Cool. All right. And we're going to put money over here and pain over here. So Elon Musk offers you a chance to use this new device. We are in a near future dystopia that looks exactly like our current dystopia. So Elon Musk offers you an opportunity to use a new device. And the device is a dial that he implants into your head. And you're going to turn that dial from 0 to, let's say, 10,000. So from 0 to 10,000, and every time you turn it up, every higher number represents a higher degree of pain. And they've done some science already on people, and they've learned that when you reach 10,000 exactly, you die. But every time you crank the dial, he's going to give you, let's say $100,000. Does that work out properly? It doesn't matter, just an absolute shit ton of money. So that we're talking about maybe like you get $1 billion. I don't know what that comes out to. You get $1 billion if you turn it all the way up to 10,000, but you also die. So the first question of the puzzle of self-torture is like, where do you start? These are almost rhetorical. They're so self-evident. You start at 0, right? You're not going to like want to install this thing at 5,000. And then every day you have to click it. How much do you click it every day? Well, the answer to that one is also relatively straightforward. It's once, right? There's no reason for you to go from 0 to 100 when you could make, if we're going to call this, oh, I said $1 billion, I wrote $1 million, didn't I? I'm not a math professor, it's fine. there's no reason to click past more than one if you're going to get the same amount of money every time you click. So let's say if you're going to get, what is this math? 1,000,000,000 billion divided by the 10,000, you're going to get $100,000 every day. So day one, you click it up to $100,000. Day two, you click it up to two, $200,000 total, another $100,000. Day three, you click it up to three. You guys are better at math than I am. You get the point. Here's the tricky part, though. You are willing to click it up for a couple of different reasons. One is this incentive, this crazy amount of money, right? The other, and this is the part that Andrew really cares about, Andrew's writing this to critique our prisoner's dilemma. If you remember that, where we had those sort of like slips of paper and we passed them back and forth and tried to betray each other, he said it's not quite so simple. If we're doing iterated prisoner's dilemmas, what we're really doing is this puzzle of the self-torture, right? Because sometimes we're willing to cause ourselves harm for the potential gain. And here's the point he tries to drive home. The difference between 0 and 1 is a lot less than the difference between 0 and 10. Stupid, obvious. The difference between 1 and 2 is also the same difference between 9,998 and 9,999, right? Like it sucks a lot more, but the difference between those 2 degrees is very small. So if you just installed this device and cranked it up to 9,000, you would feel extreme pain. But if you like slowly clicked your way up there, we're assuming like if the pain is bad enough at 10,000 you die, you'd still feel it, but like you're not going to feel it as acutely because you're getting used to it on the way up. What does this have to do with the environment? Well, the trouble is, Andrew says like any rational person who's willing to say like $1 billion would absolutely change my life. I don't know how many years is 10,000 days. That's probably like not. It's 27 years. That's too long. But you know, any rational person is willing to say like, sure, I'll put this device in and maybe I'll click it. You know, I'll just do this for 100 days and make $10 million. That would probably change my life pretty well. You could even do it for 10 days and make $1 million. The problem is for the environment, we don't actually know where that part is. So if we replace just like dollars for you with kind of like progress for humanity, we could measure that in terms of GDP, but probably we also mean things like technology, things like life expectancy. So we change this to progress, and we change this to a question mark that is an appreciable number. Like we can tell that we have made technological progress since the 1500s. We can tell that there have been general quality of life improvements for the average person if you just took everybody in the whole world and took their quality of life average since the 1500s. So we're seeing like an appreciable difference. And then we're replacing pain with an environmental cost. It makes sense for us to always try to turn it up a little bit more, right? There's no reason why we would want to stop here and only make this much progress when we know we only have to click it one more time and we'll make just like another click of progress. But the trouble is that with, can I make this curvy? I can draw it. The trouble is with environmental ethics that we don't really know at what point we reach a place where our curve begins to get out of control and we can't stop it anymore. And we suddenly hit, no, that went the wrong direction. Our curve begins to get out of control, and not in terms of the progress that we make, but in terms of the environmental costs, goes out of control. In other words, it might make complete sense for us to tick up 1% or 0.1% of our environmental costs for another 0.1% of progress until we hit this place where there's runaway climate change, or where we our cows start dying in the commons and we've eaten so much that like the grass will never grow back. So again, it's perfectly logical. It makes complete sense to click it up one notch at a time. It even sort of like feels more okay to click it up one notch at a time than to like do a huge jump, or to say like, okay, no more progress. but we're running into this risk where we hit this infinite point where ultimately, like obviously, once we reach too drastic of an environmental cost, progress dies with the rest of us, but also where we can't stop it. We can't turn it back around. Okay, so these two different thought experiments. We have sorry, I'm looking over here at my notes really fast. We have the tragedy of the commons from Harding, and we have the self-torture from Andreaus. And both of these sort of say it's perfectly logical for us to crank progress up to 11, even if it means ultimately self-destruction. So that says something like logic can't be the only solution, right? We could write this out. If it is logical to increase our environmental cost and ultimately increasing our environmental costs becomes self-destructive, then ... like this is what we have tried to show with Kant when we are trying to prove why lying is wrong, right? We've made a syllogism that can't finish. It's illogical. Logic can't be enough to keep us from being illogical. Do we see that there? He asked his computer screen. So in other words, just to make sure that we're sort of following it, because we have it's logical to increase our environmental costs as our first premise, because it is, as I've shown through all of this math, right? It makes sense from at least a self-interested perspective, from a coldly rational, social contract-y perspective. It makes sense for me to, Kate, to keep increasing my environmental cost. But ultimately, we reach this place where it stops being logical. And what Andreaus teaches us is that we don't really know where that place is. We need something more than logic to keep us from becoming illogical. So Andreaus' concern at the end of their piece is how we, in fact, let's see, no, I have to select that. How we enforce something that keeps us from just ramping up our use of the commons. How do we enforce something that keeps us from ticking up that dial of progress to the point where we die? Because nobody really wants to say like, okay, that's enough progress. We're just going to stay here. What we're really talking about is something like, oh, my mind just went blank. I am sick, as I didn't say at the beginning of this. We're talking about, this isn't the phrase I was trying to find, but like a government enforcement, right? Or some kind of social enforcing of essentially arbitrary, right? Because we don't know where that runaway point is, arbitrary limits on progress. How do you install those, and how would you do that in a way that that holds when the social contract itself seems to be like part of the root of the problem, right? That logic itself is self-destructive when it comes to environmental use. We don't have an answer to this, obviously. I do resonate with the optimism of that video. I think your generation and my generation can maybe fix what the hundreds and hundreds of generations, or not years, generations, but the hundreds and hundreds of years of industrialization have done to the planet. I don't know that social contract is going to be enough for it, right? Because we need to designate essentially arbitrary limits, and we need some sort of something more than logic. That might be it might be just emotion, right? I think this is something that we've seen with Greta Thunberg, for example, is that her arguments make sense, but she's also a very compelling speaker. It might be some sort of, unfortunately, some sort of environmental catastrophe that finally sort of pushes us over that emotional edge. As we're trying to think about, like, what do we do to solve the problem, we have to confront Parfit, I believe is how you say their name, Parfit's argument that, like, maybe we don't need to. So Parfit says, like, if future people don't exist, actually, let's start with, like, we owe existing people protection, right? It is part of the law of beneficence that we have to keep, we have to do what we can to keep people safe, to keep people healthy, to do what we can for our fellow people. However, but future people don't exist, right? So they're just the idea of people So we don't owe them any protection, because why would we? They're not real. He also makes the argument that, like, okay, let's imagine that that's not convincing for you. He says future people depend on present people, right? Like, we're not going to have babies unless people in the present continue to live. So the quality and quality of life and quantity of people in the present will determine future people, quality of life and quantity of people. So we should do our best. That is, like, we should turn the dial as much as we can, as much as we want, to make our present lives as, let's say, like, enjoyable, use resources as we want to. Basically, like, we owe the future by doing what makes us happiest in the present. So both of these syllogisms, let me break this one up a little bit. Blendable. Both of these syllogisms essentially suggest that, like, maybe we don't have to save the planet. Maybe as long as you and I can make it to old age and then die of mostly old age related things and not of the climate wars or some sort of disaster, then, like, we did our job. We don't owe people in the year 3000 anything. They're not real. We don't owe people in the year 2300 anything. They're not real. And if we do owe them something, let's make, like, the best life for ourselves so that they are starting out at a higher level. In this article, which, by the way, in case it's not obvious, I think is total bullshit. He also says stuff like, well, we should just sort of, like, try to increase progress now so that we can come up with a way of beating climate change in the future. So we don't even, we might turn past the point on that dial where it runs away for us now, but if we just kept making progress, maybe we'll find a way to bring it back. It seems like a pretty huge risk to me. But I think we still have to contend with this argument because he is correct. Future people don't exist. And there's not necessarily, like, we can't engage in a social contract with future people. They're not real. So they don't have any claims on us. There's really no rational reason why we should have to care about future people. This is especially true if you are an atheist who says, like, there's no afterlife, there's no sort of divine spark in people, so, like, who cares, right? If the human race dies out, the human race dies out. It also might be compelling if you are religious, right? If you think that a deity has a plan, then, like, you just sort of go along with that, right? This world is often not the end of things in theologies where the deity might return and bring people up to heaven or something like that. It's different, I think, if you are part of a tradition that believes in something like reincarnation or pantheism. So it turns out logic can't necessarily be enough to make us owe future generations something. And maybe you're convinced by this claim, right? Maybe you're like, well, even though Dr. Cass doesn't like this argument, I think it's compelling. You're totally fine to do that. I don't think you're a bad person. What I do want to do is sort of, like, think about what we might owe future people and why we might owe them that, what we might owe the environment and why we might owe it that, through a thought experiment. So let's imagine, look at my notes here because I wrote this down. Let's imagine a future in which all humans can travel among the stars with ease. So we have interstellar travel, not a problem. We can cryo sleep on the way there, or we can fold space and super fast. So given the calculation that there could be approximately, and this is real, 50 sextillion habitable planets in the universe and 60 billion in the Milky Way alone, the human species has decided that we can use up all the planet's resources, so we can, like, strip mine it into dust, we can pollute it as we wish. And when we get tired of the planet, we can just bounce off to the next one. For the sake of thought experimenting here, let's say, like, everybody can come. We have whatever else is happening in our society. There's one rule, and that is, like, there's no, people who wear yellow shirts can't come with us. Everybody can come. There's not an issue of justice here. By the time we get back around to that planet again, let's say we use up all of Earth and we start bouncing around across these 50 sextillion planets. By the time we get back to Earth again, even if we go through one planet every year, Earth will have, like, completely reformed itself, right? It will regenerate. There will be more plants again. There will be more animals again. We can strip mine it, turn it back into dust, move on to the next habitable planet. So the question is, should we? What I want you to do with whoever has filled in here, I think it'll probably be Dr. Whitcomb, is talk about this thought experiment. You can also, of course, go back and talk about any of those other elements that I gave you. I guess I could, well, actually, no. Let me leave these up here for now. Hi, Jabberwocky. I want you to think about this thought experiment somewhat systematically. So, like, what are the issues that consequentialism would think about? I'll give you some hints since I'm not there. We're going to think about how much do animals count for consequences, and this can be pleasure or pain. This can be preferences. How much does the environment count? So this could be something like land. This could be something like ecosystems as an entity. And then think about the ontology. Is there anything inherently illogical or wrong with this, let's call it like planet hopping? What duties do we owe planets, if anything? Think about virtue ethics. So do we find these motives virtuous? What kind of city, what kind of people, what kind of group would come out of this practice? And then ethics of care is trickier for this one, but think about sort of like how would this affect our relationships? Each other, animals. And keep in mind that emotion is really important for care ethics. That's right here. All of these questions, I think, will give us some interesting insight into how we actually feel about Harding and Andrew and Parfit, because if we answer to any of these things, that there is some sort of reason why we should care for future people, or there is some sort of reason why we should be illogical about our use, right? Why the United States shouldn't just use as much of the world's resources as it can, because everyone else is going to use as much as they can, so we may as well just sort of like try to win that race. I don't remember what the beginning of my sentence was. Again, sorry, sick brain. What I meant to say was like, answering these questions will help us to answer those questions. There's one other thing I was going to say. Oh, while you're thinking about land, I'll leave you with sort of like one other thing to consider. We talked, I believe, about Sortier's paradoxes. Don't expect that you remember that. It was just like a one-off. I personally am very interested in questions like, I would usually say look outside, but there are no windows in this room. I look outside, I see like a rock. Nobody cares about a rock. A rock is not alive. And I'm using a rock on purpose instead of like a tree because we have arguments about trees being alive and trees communicating and stuff. But nobody really cares about a rock. But if we make that rock big enough and it's like half dome, now we care. So the question I would ask there is like, why, right? At what point does a rock become large enough, or a bunch of rocks become large enough, or insert any kind of ecosystem here, become large enough that it suddenly matters? And why does it matter? Does it matter because of any of these reasons? And then we haven't talked about it in this class because this isn't like a full philosophy class, we're just doing ethics. But it's worth thinking about sort of like aesthetics. Are we compelled by nature just because it's awesome and impressive? Awesome in a, not like a 1980s sense, but like awesome as in like awe-inspiring. And can aesthetics be like a cause for ethics? Okay, hopefully that gives you guys enough to think about. And I would rather not be sick at all. I hope to be back on Wednesday since it is our last day. Thank you guys. Thank you, whoever's filling in. And I will see you guys hopefully in a few days.